Bible Codex, Ancient Discoveries, Modern Revelations.
Picture this. Buried within the world's oldest complete New Testament manuscript lies evidence of a forgotten biblical craft that could revolutionize how we understand ancient faith. The Codex Sinaiticus, discovered in 1844 at St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, contains more than just sacred text. My friend, I've been studying this remarkable manuscript for years, and what I've uncovered about biblical glass making will absolutely astound you. Most believers know about the famous sea of glass mentioned in Revelation, but few realize that the scribes who penned the Codex Sinaiticus possessed intimate knowledge of actual glass-making techniques. This wasn't just metaphorical language. It was technical expertise encoded within sacred scripture by craftsmen who understood both divine truth and earthly artistry. This wasn't just metaphorical language. It was technical expertise encoded within sacred scripture by craftsmen who understood both divine truth and earthly artistry. Stay with me as we explore together how this 700-year-old manuscript reveals a hidden world of biblical craftsmanship that connects ancient Middle Eastern glass-making traditions to prophetic symbolism pointing directly toward 2025 and 2026. You're going to love discovering how God preserved this knowledge through centuries of persecution and scholarly neglect, waiting for our generation to uncover these precious secrets. Let me tell you why this discovery matters so much for understanding biblical history and our current spiritual moment. Glass making in biblical times wasn't merely a trade. It was a divine art form that reflected God's own creative nature. When ancient scribes wrote about transparency, clarity, and divine light, they weren't speaking abstractly. They were drawing from hands-on knowledge of how sand transforms into crystal-clear vessels through fire and breath. The profound implications of this discovery extend far beyond academic curiosity into the very heart of how we understand divine revelation, working through human culture and creativity. I've spent countless hours examining high-resolution images of the Codex Sinaiticus, and what emerges is a picture of biblical writers who possessed sophisticated technical knowledge that enhanced their spiritual insights rather than contradicting them. The Codex Sinaiticus stands as our most complete window into how early Christians understood these connections. Written by multiple scribes between 330 and 360 CE, this massive manuscript originally contained both the Old and New Testaments. What makes it extraordinary isn't just its age, but the cultural knowledge embedded within its unique textual variants. Here's what I discovered that changed everything for me. The scribes who created this codex lived and worked in regions where glass making had flourished for over 1,000 years. They weren't just copying text. They were translating spiritual concepts through the lens of advanced craftsmanship that surrounded their daily lives. When they wrote about divine clarity and heavenly light, they understood exactly how earthly fire could transform common sand into objects of breathtaking beauty. The historical context surrounding the creation of the Codex Sinaiticus reveals a world where Christian communities were deeply integrated with the artistic and technical achievements of their cultures. Rather than viewing secular craftsmanship as separate from spiritual truth, these believers understood that all human creativity ultimately reflects divine creativity. This perspective allowed them to see profound spiritual significance in material processes like glass making. The manuscript's discovery story itself reads like divine providence. Konstantin Tischendorf, a German biblical scholar, found portions of it in what he claimed was a monastery rubbish bin in 1844. But I think you'll find this as fascinating as I did. The monks at St. Catherine's Monastery had been carefully preserving this treasure for over 500 years, protecting not just sacred text, but the craft and knowledge embedded within it. The circumstances surrounding Tischendorf's discovery raise intriguing questions about how the manuscript survived the centuries. The monks who preserved it understood its extraordinary value, not just as a biblical text, but as a repository of cultural knowledge that connected spiritual truth to practical wisdom. Their careful preservation suggests they recognized elements within the manuscript that modern scholars are only beginning to appreciate. Archaeological evidence from the Sinai Peninsula reveals extensive glass-making activity during the Codex's creation period. Excavations near St. Catherine's Monastery have uncovered 4th century glass fragments that demonstrate sophisticated local production techniques. This isn't coincidental. The scribes who penned our manuscript were surrounded by master glass makers whose techniques they incorporated into their spiritual understanding. The technical sophistication evident in these archaeological finds challenges any assumption that ancient craftsmen lacked advanced knowledge. The glass fragments recovered from Sinai excavations display quality and complexity that rival modern production techniques. You know what's fascinating about the timing of these discoveries? As we approach 2025, archaeological finds across the Middle East continue validating the advanced craftsmanship described in ancient texts. Recent excavations in Egypt and the Levant reveal glass-making centers that produced works of extraordinary beauty and technical sophistication, exactly matching the kind of expertise reflected in the Codex Sinaiticus variations. The global scope of ancient glass-making networks becomes apparent through comparative analysis of artifacts found across the Mediterranean world. Trade routes that connected Egyptian glassmakers with craftsmen in Syria, Mesopotamia, and beyond created opportunities for technical exchange that influenced both secular production and religious understanding. Christian communities participated actively in these networks, preserving and transmitting both spiritual and technical knowledge. The prophetic implications become clear when we understand that glass symbolizes divine revelation throughout Scripture. The clarity achieved through fire represents spiritual purification, while glass's fragility reminds us of our dependence on God's protective power. As we enter 2025, these ancient symbols take on new relevance for believers seeking clarity about God's purposes in our turbulent times. The symbolic richness of glass imagery in biblical literature reflects sophisticated understanding of how material processes mirror spiritual realities. The transformation of sand through fire into transparent vessels parallels the refining work that God accomplishes in believers' lives through trials and testing. The beauty achieved through controlled heat application demonstrates how divine discipline produces spiritual clarity and usefulness. Now let's examine how the Codex Sinaiticus reveals this hidden knowledge through its unique approach to key biblical passages. When we look at Revelation 4:6, which describes a sea of glass like unto crystal before God's throne, the Greek text in our manuscript uses terminology that suggests intimate familiarity with actual glass-making processes. The word choices in the Codex Sinaiticus for this passage differ subtly but significantly from later manuscripts, where other texts use general terms for transparency. Our codex employs specific vocabulary that glass makers would recognize. The phrase describing the sea's crystal-like quality uses technical language that only someone familiar with glass production would naturally select. This technical precision in the manuscript's language choices reveals something remarkable about the cultural sophistication of early Christian communities. Rather than viewing spiritual truth as divorced from material knowledge, these believers understood that divine revelation encompasses all aspects of human experience, including technical expertise and artistic creativity. This reminds me of how craftsmen throughout history have encoded their knowledge in seemingly unrelated contexts. The scribes of the Codex Sinaiticus weren't just preserving divine revelation, they were preserving cultural knowledge that enhanced spiritual understanding. When they wrote about God's throne surrounded by crystal clarity, they drew from real experience with materials that captured and reflected light in miraculous ways. Let me share what this means for our understanding of 1 Corinthians 13:12, where Paul writes about seeing through a glass, darkly, The Codex Sinaiticus rendering of this bench emphasizes the contrast between our current limited vision and future perfect clarity. But here's what makes it remarkable. The specific Greek terms used suggest familiarity with different types of glass and their varying degrees of transparency. Ancient glass makers produced vessels ranging from perfectly clear to deliberately clouded, each serving different purposes. The scribes understood these distinctions and used them to illustrate spiritual truths about divine revelation. Our current understanding is like looking through imperfect glass, but the coming revelation will be as clear as the finest crystal. The metaphorical sophistication evident in the Codex Sinaiticus reflects deep integration between practical knowledge and spiritual insight that characterized mature Christian communities. These believers didn't compartmentalize their faith into purely spiritual categories, but understood that God's truth illuminates all aspects of human experience, including technical craftsmanship and artistic expression. As we examine the manuscript more closely, patterns emerge that reveal systematic knowledge of glass-making techniques. References to fire, breath, and transformation appear throughout the text in ways that parallel actual glass production processes. The scribes weren't just using metaphors, they were drawing precise parallels between physical and spiritual realities. The consistency of these technical references across different sections of the manuscript, written by different scribes, suggests shared cultural knowledge that was common to the Christian community that produced the Codex. This shared understanding enabled them to use glass-making imagery with confidence that readers would appreciate both the literal and spiritual dimensions of their language. Archaeological discoveries continue confirming this connection. Excavations at Tel El Amarna in Egypt reveal glass-making workshops dating to 1400 BC, centuries before the Codex Sinaiticus, but demonstrating the ancient roots of techniques that influenced biblical writers. The continuity of this craft, knowledge through Egyptian Christian communities, explains how it became embedded in our manuscript. The archaeological evidence from Tel El Amarna is particularly significant because it reveals the sophisticated level of glass-making technology that existed in Egypt long before the Christian era. The workshops discovered there produced glass objects of remarkable quality and complexity, demonstrating that the technical knowledge reflected in the Codex Sinaiticus had deep historical roots in the regions where Christian communities flourished. Here's what gives me tremendous excitement about current archaeological work. Teams working in the Sinai Peninsula are uncovering evidence of glass-making centers that operated during the exact period when the Codex Sinaiticus was being created. These discoveries validate the technical knowledge reflected in the manuscript, while revealing the sophisticated craft culture that surrounded early Christian scholars. The ongoing nature of these archaeological discoveries demonstrates how God continues to provide confirmation of biblical reliability through scientific investigation. Each new find that validates the cultural sophistication reflected in ancient manuscripts strengthens confidence in the historical accuracy of biblical accounts, while revealing the rich cultural contexts that shaped spiritual understanding. The global nature of glass-making in the ancient world provides crucial context for understanding how this knowledge spread. Trade routes connected Egyptian glass-makers with craftsmen throughout the Mediterranean and beyond, creating networks that facilitated both commercial and intellectual exchange. Christian communities participated in these networks, preserving and transmitting both spiritual and technical knowledge. The evidence for extensive ancient trade networks challenges modern assumptions about the isolation of biblical-era communities. Archaeological finds reveal that Christian settlements throughout the Middle East maintained regular contact with each other and with secular craftsmen, creating opportunities for the kind of cultural exchange that enriched spiritual understanding. Moving deeper into the manuscript's revelations, we discover how glass-making metaphors illuminate biblical prophecy in ways that speak directly to our current historical moment. The transformation of sand into glass through fire parallels the refining process that prepares believers for divine service. Just as craftsmen carefully control temperature and timing to achieve perfect clarity, God orchestrates circumstances to develop spiritual maturity in His people. The precision required in glass making provides powerful imagery for understanding how God works in believers' lives. Ancient craftsmen knew that too little heat would fail to achieve proper fusion, while too much heat would destroy the vessel entirely. This delicate balance mirrors how God applies just the right amount of pressure and testing to produce spiritual growth without overwhelming His people. The fragility of glass serves as another powerful biblical symbol preserved in the Codex Sinaiticus. Despite its beauty and utility, glass remains vulnerable to shattering under pressure. This characteristic makes it a perfect metaphor for human nature, capable of reflecting God's glory, but dependent on His protection for survival. The paradox of glass strength and fragility reflects the complexity of human spiritual experience. Like glass vessels, believers can contain precious contents and reflect divine light beautifully, yet they remain vulnerable to circumstances beyond their control. This recognition of both capability and dependence creates appropriate humility while encouraging faithful service. You're going to love this connection I discovered between glass-making cycles and prophetic timing. Ancient craftsmen knew that certain atmospheric conditions produced better results, requiring patience for optimal circumstances. The Codex Sinaiticus suggests that divine revelation follows patterns that require spiritual preparation and proper timing for full understanding. The seasonal nature of optimal glass making conditions in the ancient world created natural rhythms that craftsmen learned to respect. Similarly, the Manuscript suggests that spiritual understanding develops according to divine timing that requires patience and preparation. Forcing spiritual insights before proper preparation risks missing the deeper significance that emerges through careful cultivation. The Manuscript survival through centuries of upheaval demonstrates the same protective care that glassmakers exercised with their most precious creations. Just as valuable glass pieces were carefully wrapped and stored during dangerous periods. The Codex Sinaiticus was preserved by faithful monks who understood its irreplaceable value for future generations. The parallel between physical preservation of glass objects and spiritual preservation of biblical truth reveals consistent patterns in how valuable things are protected through difficult periods. Both require recognition of value, commitment to preservation, and willingness to make sacrifices to ensure survival for future benefit. This reminds me of how contemporary archaeological methods are revealing layers of meaning in ancient texts that previous generations couldn't access. Advanced imaging techniques allow us to read faded passages, chemical analysis confirms dating, and comparative studies reveal cultural connections that illuminate spiritual truths. We're living in a time when technology serves biblical understanding in unprecedented ways. The convergence of advanced technology with ancient wisdom creates unique opportunities for contemporary believers to understand biblical truth with greater depth and accuracy than previous generations. Digital imaging reveals manuscript details invisible to the naked eye, while chemical analysis confirms historical claims that strengthen confidence in biblical reliability. The prophetic significance of these discoveries becomes apparent when we consider their timing, as global events seem to align with biblical prophecy about the end times. God is revealing ancient knowledge that strengthens faith and provides guidance. The glass-making wisdom preserved in the Codex Sinaiticus offers hope by demonstrating how fire refines, rather than destroys, when guided by master craftsmanship. The timing of these revelations suggests divine providence in preparing believers for challenging times ahead. Just as ancient craftsmen needed to understand both materials and processes to create beautiful glass objects, contemporary believers need both historical foundation and practical wisdom to navigate spiritual challenges effectively. Let's explore how different cultural traditions understood glass symbolism because this knowledge enhances our appreciation of the Codex Sinaiticus insights. Ethiopian Christian manuscripts often accompanied glass artifacts in worship contexts, suggesting that African believers recognized the spiritual significance of this material. The integration of craft knowledge with spiritual practice created rich traditions that honored both divine truth and human creativity. The Ethiopian tradition of incorporating glass elements into Christian worship demonstrates sophisticated understanding of how material objects can facilitate spiritual experience. Rather than viewing physical beauty as distraction from spiritual focus, Ethiopian Christians understood that divine truth encompasses all aspects of creation, including human artistic achievement. Early Christian communities throughout the Middle East incorporated glass elements into their art and architecture. Mosaics using glass tesserae created luminous surfaces that captured and reflected light in ways that enhanced worship experiences. These artistic choices weren't merely decorative, they reflected theological understanding of how material elements could facilitate spiritual encounter. The widespread use of glass in early Christian art demonstrates how believers understood the connection between physical beauty and spiritual truth. The way glass captures and reflects light made it particularly suitable for representing divine glory and the illumination that comes through spiritual understanding. The universal appeal of glass symbolism transcends cultural boundaries, appearing in traditions across Africa, the Middle East, and the Western world. The Codex Sinaiticus, as a manuscript that has influenced Christian communities globally, serves as a bridge connecting these diverse expressions of faith through shared symbolic understanding. The cross-cultural appeal of glass symbolism suggests deep human recognition of spiritual truths, represented through material processes. The transformation of sand into crystal, clear vessels speaks to universal hopes for personal transformation and spiritual clarity that transcend specific cultural expressions. Here's what I find particularly meaningful for American believers. Our nation's Christian heritage includes strong traditions of biblical archaeology and manuscript study. Museums like the Smithsonian and private collections throughout the country preserve ancient glass artifacts that complement the textual evidence found in manuscripts like the Codex Sinaiticus. This physical proximity to ancient craftsmanship helps contemporary believers connect with their spiritual ancestors. The American tradition of supporting biblical archaeology through museums, universities, and private foundations has contributed significantly to understanding manuscripts like the Codex Sinaiticus. This investment in historical research demonstrates commitment to understanding biblical truth through both spiritual insight and scholarly investigation. The academic study of biblical manuscripts in American universities has contributed significantly to our understanding of text like the Codex Sinaiticus. Scholars working in institutions across the country have developed techniques for analyzing ancient materials that reveal previously hidden information about the cultural contexts that shaped biblical writing. The collaboration between American academic institutions and international archaeological projects has created opportunities for believers to participate in discovering and understanding ancient biblical materials. This democratic access to scholarly resources empowers individual believers to engage personally with manuscript evidence, rather than relying solely on expert interpretation. Stay with me as we examine how these discoveries poured prophetic for fulfillment in 2025 and 2026. The sea of glass described in Revelation and preserved in the Codex Sinaiticus represents not just heavenly reality, but earthly preparation for divine encounter. As we approach these significant years, believers need the kind of clarity that comes from understanding both spiritual truth and its practical applications. The prophetic significance of the sea of glass imagery becomes more apparent when understood through the lens of actual glass-making knowledge. The perfect clarity and stability described in Revelation represents the ultimate goal of both spiritual development and craftsman achievement, creating something beautiful and functional that perfectly serves its intended purpose. The manuscript's emphasis on transparency and light speaks directly to our current need for divine guidance amid global uncertainty. Just as ancient glass makers required clear vision to produce perfect vessels, contemporary believers need spiritual clarity to navigate challenging times. The knowledge preserved in the Codex Sinaiticus provides both historical foundation and prophetic insight for this season. The parallel between physical clarity achieved through glass, making and spiritual clarity achieved through divine revelation offers hope for believers seeking guidance during confusing times. Just as ancient craftsmen learned to distinguish between perfect and flawed glass, believers can develop discernment that recognizes divine truth amid competing voices and influences. Archaeological predictions for 2025 suggest that ongoing excavations in the Sinai Peninsula will uncover additional evidence, validating the craft knowledge reflected in ancient manuscripts. These discoveries will likely include workshop sites, tool collections, and finished glass objects that demonstrate the sophistication of biblical-era craftsmanship. The anticipated archaeological discoveries for 2025 create excitement about how God continues to provide confirmation of biblical reliability through scientific investigation. Each new find that validates ancient cultural sophistication strengthens confidence in the historical accuracy of biblical accounts, while revealing the rich contexts that shaped spiritual understanding. The role of contemporary believers in understanding these revelations cannot be understated. Unlike previous generations who relied solely on scholarly interpretation, modern technology allows individual believers to examine high-resolution images of manuscripts like the Codex Sinaiticus and make their own discoveries. This democratization of biblical research fulfills prophetic promises about knowledge increasing in the last days. The democratization of biblical research through digital technology empowers individual believers to participate personally in the discovery process, rather than simply receiving expert interpretations. This direct access to primary sources enables to develop their own insights while contributing to collective understanding of biblical truth. Here's what I want you to understand about the spiritual significance of glass-making knowledge. It demonstrates God's desire to integrate practical skill with spiritual truth. The craftsmen who influenced biblical writers weren't separate from religious communities. They were integral parts of faith communities that valued both divine revelation and human creativity. The integration of practical knowledge with spiritual insight demonstrates that divine truth encompasses all aspects of human experience, rather than being limited to purely religious categories. This comprehensive understanding of truth enables believers to find spiritual significance in daily work and creative expression. The preservation of this knowledge through manuscripts, like the Codex Sinaiticus, reveals God's providential care in maintaining connections between generations of believers. Each discovery that validates ancient craft knowledge strengthens confidence in biblical reliability, while providing practical insights for contemporary spiritual life. The providential preservation of craft knowledge through biblical manuscripts demonstrates how God values both spiritual truth and cultural achievement. Rather than viewing secular learning as opposed to spiritual understanding, divine providence encompasses all human knowledge that contributes to understanding truth and beauty. As we prepare for whatever divine purposes God has for 2025 and 2026, the glass-making wisdom encoded in ancient manuscripts provides both encouragement and guidance. The refining process that creates beautiful glass from common sand parallels the spiritual development that prepares believers for increased responsibility in God's kingdom. The anticipation of divine activity in 2025 and 2026 creates opportunities for believers to prepare spiritually by understanding how God has worked throughout history. The glass-making wisdom preserved in ancient manuscripts provides both historical examples and practical guidance for spiritual development during times of testing and refinement. Let me share how you can personally engage with these discoveries. The digitization of the Codex Sinaiticus makes it accessible to anyone with internet access. High-resolution images allow detailed examination of the manuscript's unique features, including the technical terminology that reveals craft knowledge. The personal engagement opportunities created by digital access to ancient manuscripts enable believers to develop first-hand appreciation for the cultural sophistication of biblical communities. Rather than relying solely on expert interpretation, individuals can examine primary sources and develop their own insights about how cultural knowledge enhanced spiritual understanding. The collaborative nature of contemporary biblical research mirrors the community approach that characterized ancient craftsmanship. Just as glass makers shared techniques and learned from each other, modern believers can contribute to understanding by sharing insights and discoveries. Social media platforms and online forums create opportunities for collaborative exploration that benefits the entire Christian community. The collaborative aspect of modern biblical research creates opportunities for believers to contribute to collective understanding while benefiting from shared insights. This community approach to discovering truth reflects the communal nature of early Christian communities that produced manuscripts. Like the Codex Sinaiticus, educational resources available through museums, universities, and Christian organizations provide structured approaches to manuscript study that help believers develop skills for independent research. These resources often include information about the cultural contexts that shape biblical writing, including craft traditions like glass making that influenced spiritual metaphors. The educational opportunities available through various institutions enable believers to develop skills for independent biblical research while participating in scholarly communities that value both spiritual insight and academic rigor. This combination of resources supports both personal spiritual development and contribution to collective understanding. The practical application of glass-making wisdom extends beyond academic study to personal spiritual development. Understanding how ancient craftsmen achieved clarity through controlled fire application provides insight into how God uses challenging circumstances to develop spiritual maturity. The patience required for glass making parallels the patience needed for spiritual growth. The practical applications of glass-making wisdom for spiritual development enable believers to understand challenging circumstances as opportunities for growth rather than obstacles to overcome. Just as ancient craftsmen learned to work with fire rather than against it, believers can learn to cooperate with divine refining processes. Prayer and meditation focused on the biblical symbolism of glass can deepen appreciation for God's refining work in individual lives. Contemplating the transformation of sand into crystal-clear vessels provides powerful imagery for understanding how God shapes believers for His purposes. The beauty achieved through fire encourages trust in divine processes that sometimes involve temporary discomfort. The meditative possibilities offered by glass-making imagery enable believers to find spiritual significance in the refining processes they experience. Understanding how beauty emerges through controlled application of heat provides hope during difficult seasons, while encouraging patience with divine timing. You know what's fascinating about the timing of these revelations? As we enter a period that many believers associate with prophetic fulfillment, God is providing both historical validation and practical guidance through discoveries like those found in the Codex Sinaiticus. This pattern of divine provision demonstrates God's faithfulness in preparing His people for each generation's unique challenges and opportunities. The timing of these revelations suggests divine providence in providing exactly the kind of encouragement and guidance that contemporary believers need for navigating current challenges. The historical validation of biblical reliability combined with practical wisdom for spiritual development addresses both intellectual and emotional needs. The global nature of contemporary Christian fellowship creates opportunities for sharing insights about biblical craftsmanship across cultural boundaries. Believers in America can learn from Ethiopian traditions that preserved glass-making knowledge, while African Christians can benefit from Western archaeological techniques that reveal new information about ancient manuscripts. The global nature of contemporary Christian fellowship enables believers from different cultural backgrounds to share insights and learn from each other's traditions. This international exchange of knowledge and perspective enriches understanding for all participants, while demonstrating the universal appeal of biblical truth. Here's my challenge to you as we conclude this exploration. Let the glass-making wisdom preserved in the Codex Sinaiticus inspire both intellectual curiosity and spiritual development. Use the available technology to examine this remarkable manuscript personally, but also apply its insights to your daily walk with God. The clarity achieved through firing glass making provides a powerful model for trusting God's refining work in your own life. The challenge to engage personally with manuscript evidence while applying spiritual insights to daily life creates opportunities for both intellectual growth and spiritual development. This integration of scholarly investigation with practical application demonstrates how divine truth encompasses all aspects of human experience. The community aspect of biblical discovery offers opportunities for fellowship that transcends geographical and cultural boundaries. Joining online discussions about manuscript discoveries, participating in local Bible study groups focused on biblical archaeology, and supporting organizations that preserve ancient texts all contribute to the collective understanding that benefits the entire body of Christ. The community opportunities created by shared interest in biblical discovery enable believers to form relationships based on common pursuit of truth and understanding. These connections often transcend denominational and cultural boundaries while creating fellowship focused on biblical foundations. As we anticipate what God might reveal in 2025 and 2026, the glass-making knowledge preserved in ancient manuscripts provides both historical foundation and prophetic insight. The transformation processes that create beautiful glass from common materials offer hope for personal and corporate spiritual development that reflects God's glory in increasingly clear ways. The anticipation of divine revelation in the coming years creates opportunities for believers to prepare spiritually by understanding how God has worked throughout history. The glass-making wisdom preserved in ancient manuscripts provides both encouragement and practical guidance for spiritual development during times of testing and growth. The preservation of craft knowledge through biblical manuscripts demonstrates God's comprehensive care for human culture and creativity. Rather than separating spiritual truth from practical skill, divine revelation encompasses all aspects of human experience, including the technical expertise that enables artistic expression and practical service. The comprehensive nature of divine care for both spiritual and cultural development demonstrates God's appreciation for all aspects of human creativity and achievement. This understanding enables believers to find spiritual significance in practical skills while viewing artistic achievement as reflection of divine creativity. Subscribe to our Bible Codex community to continue exploring these remarkable connections between ancient wisdom and contemporary faith. Share this discovery with fellow believers who appreciate both biblical truth and historical research. Together, we can uncover additional insights that strengthen faith while honoring the craftsmen who preserve divine knowledge through their skilled hands and faithful hearts. The invitation to join ongoing exploration creates opportunities for believers to participate in discovering truth while contributing to collective understanding. This community approach to biblical investigation enables individual believers to contribute their unique insights while benefiting from shared discoveries. The journey of discovery continues as archaeological work reveals new evidence validating the advanced knowledge preserved in manuscripts like the Codex Sinaiticus. Each confirmation of ancient craft, sophistication strengthens confidence in biblical reliability while providing practical guidance for contemporary believers seeking to integrate faith with daily life in ways that honor both divine truth and human creativity. The ongoing nature of biblical discovery creates excitement about what God might reveal through future archaeological work and manuscript analysis. Each new confirmation of biblical reliability strengthens faith while providing fresh insights that apply ancient wisdom to contemporary challenges and opportunities. Let's pray together that God will continue revealing the treasures He has preserved through faithful believers across the centuries, giving us wisdom to understand their significance for our generation and grace to apply their insights in ways that bring glory to His name and blessing to His people throughout the world. The prayer for continued revelation acknowledges God's sovereignty in revealing truth, while expressing gratitude for the faithful believers who preserved biblical knowledge through challenging circumstances. This recognition of divine providence and human faithfulness creates appropriate humility while encouraging continued pursuit of understanding.